I've been tracking European politics for years, but what I witnessed at exactly 14:47 CET on a cold Tuesday afternoon in Berlin fundamentally altered my understanding of institutional power. A single document, barely 37 pages long, detonated like a diplomatic grenade across the carefully maintained facade of Brussels' political establishment. Alice Weidele didn't schedule a press conference. She didn't wait for official channels. At precisely 14:47, she posted a scanned PDF directly to her verified account with a caption that sent shockwaves through every chancellery from Lisbon to Warsaw. The European Commission has been operating a parallel budget structure. Here is the proof. Within 90 seconds, the document had been shared 12,400 times. Within 4 minutes, it crashed the servers of 3 major German news outlets simultaneously. I watched the metrics in real time, my hands trembling as I scrolled through page after page of what appeared to be internal commission accounting ledgers marked restricted distribution, eyes only. The numbers were staggering. $127 billion allocated to something called the Strategic Resilience Implementation Fund. I'd covered EU budgets for a decade. I'd never heard of this fund, not once. What made my blood run cold wasn't just the amount, it was the routing structure. The leaked document showed wire transfer authorizations dated September 9, 2025, directing funds through a consultancy network based in Luxembourg with operational branches in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary entities had names that sounded bureaucratic enough to be legitimate: European Future Strategies GmbH, Continental Advisory Solutions Ltd, Resilience Coordination Services SA. But when I cross-referenced these names against the EU's official transparency register, I found nothing. They didn't exist in any public database. They were ghosts. Alice Weidele's accompanying statement was surgical in its precision. She didn't scream conspiracy. She didn't use inflammatory language. She simply asked 3 questions that no one in Brussels could answer. Where did this $127 billion come from? Who authorized these transfers? And why were 23 members of the European Parliament never informed this fund existed? I immediately reached out to my sources inside the Berlaymont building. The response was panic barely disguised as procedural delay. The Commission does not comment on leaked materials of uncertain provenance, one spokesperson told me, her voice tight with something that sounded very much like fear. When I pressed for confirmation that the document was fabricated, she hung up. That silence told me everything. Within 6 hours, the financial markets began to react. The euro slipped 0.7% against the dollar. Bloomberg ran a breaking alert at 21:15 CET. EU Commission faces questions over alleged shadow budget amid Weidele document leak. What terrified the establishment wasn't just the revelation of the fund, it was the metadata embedded in the PDF. Forensic analysts working for independent media outlets confirmed within hours that the document had been generated from an internal Commission server. The file properties showed it had been created on August 31, 2025, and last modified on September 7, just 2 days before the transfers allegedly occurred. Someone inside the Berlaymont had turned whistleblower, and Alice Weidele was their chosen messenger. I watched Ursula von der Leyen's scheduled appearance before the Committee on Budgetary Control the following morning. She entered the chamber at exactly 09:02, her expression carefully neutral, her hands gripping a leather portfolio that I noticed she never opened during the entire session. "Madam President, can you confirm or deny the existence of the Strategic Resilience Implementation Fund?" Von der Leyen's response was a masterclass in evasion. The Commission operates multiple instruments designed to respond to emerging crises. All expenditures are conducted in accordance with treaty obligations and parliamentary oversight mechanisms. But she didn't say no. She didn't deny the fund existed. Alice Weidele released a second document at 16:33 that same afternoon. This one was even more damaging. It was an internal email chain between senior Commission officials dated July 14, 2025. The subject line read, SRIF fund structure, need for discretion. One email, written by a director general whose name I immediately recognized, stated explicitly, "Given the political sensitivities surrounding eastward infrastructure commitments, we recommend utilizing the Article 1-22 emergency provisions framework to avoid standard parliamentary appropriations procedures. This maintains operational flexibility while ensuring treaty compliance." In plain language, they were using an emergency clause designed for natural disasters and economic shocks to funnel $127 billion into a slush fund without parliamentary approval. The reaction in the hemicycle was immediate and visceral. Members of the Patriots for Europe group began pounding their desks in unison. Even representatives from the mainstream conservative EPP sat in stunned silence. I watched as Guy Verhofstadt, normally von der Leyen's reliable defender, stared at his tablet screen with an expression I can only describe as betrayal. Der Spiegel published an investigation within 12 hours tracking the consultancy firms named in the leaked documents. Their findings were explosive. European Future Strategies GmbH had been registered in Luxembourg on June 3, 2025, just 8 weeks before the first transfer. Its listed board of advisors included 2 former commission officials and, buried in the corporate filings, a reference to strategic advisory services provided by Heiko von der Leyen, Ursula von der Leyen's son. The conflict of interest was now radioactive. I spoke with a senior MEP off the record who told me the internal caucus meetings had devolved into chaos. "We have members demanding her immediate resignation. We have others arguing this is a Russian disinformation operation, and we have a growing number who are simply terrified that if we pull this thread, the entire budget structure unravels." The markets continued their slow-motion panic. By Friday, the euro had lost 1.9% of its value. Credit default swaps on European sovereign debt ticked upward. Investment banks began circulating internal memos warning clients about governance risk premiums in EU-exposed portfolios. Alice Weidele maintained an almost eerie calm. On Saturday, she published bank transfer confirmations showing that $840 million from the Strategic Resilience Fund had been routed to a consulting firm that listed its primary service as narrative coordination and stakeholder engagement. I cross-referenced that firm's client list. It included 3 organizations that had received EU grants to combat disinformation during the 2024 election cycle. Organizations that had explicitly targeted AfD and other populist parties in their campaign materials. The allegations were now incendiary. The shadow budget had potentially been weaponized to influence domestic elections across member states. I watched the Commission's emergency press briefing on Monday morning. Von der Leyen didn't appear. Instead, a visibly exhausted spokesperson read a prepared statement announcing an independent review panel that would report its findings within 90 days. Alice Weidele's response came within the hour. "The European public doesn't need 90 days. They need answers today. I am calling for an immediate freeze of all Commission discretionary accounts pending a full forensic audit by external authorities." By Tuesday, 5 member states had formally requested an emergency session of the European Council. Poland's Prime Minister issued a statement demanding von der Leyen's suspension pending the investigation. Hungary's Viktor Orbán called for criminal proceedings. I watched the European Parliament's plenary session on Thursday afternoon. The chamber was packed with journalists lining the back wall. When von der Leyen finally took the podium at 15:14, the silence was suffocating. "I want to address the allegations directly," she began, her voice steady but lacking its usual authority. "The Strategic Resilience Implementation Fund operates under full legal authority granted by existing treaty provisions. Every euro disbursed has been in service of European strategic interests." Notice what she didn't say. She didn't explain why Parliament was never informed. She didn't address the conflict of interest allegations regarding her son. And she absolutely didn't explain why $840 million went to narrative coordination firms during an election year. Alice Weidele was in the chamber that day, sitting in the AfD section with her arms crossed. When her turn came, she stood slowly, holding a single sheet of paper. Madam President, I have here a bank statement dated October 3, 2025. It shows a transfer of $67 million from the Strategic Resilience Fund to an entity called Baltic Infrastructure Futures Launitad. This company was incorporated in Cyprus on September 29, 2025, 4 days before receiving EU funds. Its registered director is a Mr. Klaus Steinmann, who, according to LinkedIn, worked as a policy advisor in your cabinet from 2021 to 2023. Would you care to explain this sequence of events? The chamber erupted. Von der Leyen's face went pale, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. I do not have immediate access to the specific transaction details you reference, she replied, her voice now noticeably thinner. But I can assure this House that all personnel involved in fund administration undergo rigorous conflict of interest screening. It was a catastrophic answer. She'd admitted she didn't know where $67 million had gone or who authorized it. The fallout was immediate. By Friday morning, 3 commissioners had requested meetings to discuss transition planning. German press reported Chancellor Scholz had called her personally to suggest taking time for reflection. In diplomatic language, resign before we force you out. Morgan Stanley published a note estimating political instability in Brussels could trigger capital flight from EU bond markets worth $89 billion over the next quarter. The governance risk premium was no longer theoretical. I received an encrypted message late Friday. Check the Commission's IT logs for September 6th-8th. Multiple secure deletions. Weidele doesn't have everything yet. I spent Saturday tracing digital footprints. Between 0217 and 0443 on September 8th, someone with administrator credentials had purged 847 gigabytes from the Commission's financial oversight servers. The deletion logs showed files classified under SRIF operational documentation. They'd tried to destroy the evidence, but they'd been too late. By Monday, the crisis had metastasized beyond Brussels. Poland announced it was withholding its next EU budget contribution pending full transparency on the Strategic Resilience Fund. Italy's finance minister publicly questioned whether the Commission had legal authority to operate discretionary funds of this magnitude without parliamentary approval. The institutional architecture was fracturing in real time. What Alice Weidel had done wasn't just expose corruption. She detonated a controlled demolition of the technocratic consensus that had governed Europe for decades. The leaked document didn't just put von der Leyen under pressure. It revealed that the European project operates with levels of financial opacity and executive overreach that would trigger constitutional crises in any functioning democracy. The clock is ticking, the questions are multiplying, and the silence from Brussels grows more damning by the hour.